Hey Ravdeep, how's it going?
Going good. Thanks for inviting me here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. So I thought we can, start with a little bit of an introduction. So you've spent time at, ClearTrip, Freecharge, Book My Show, Myntra, and so on, right? Some of the biggest consumer tech startups to come out of India. How have you seen this consumer internet space change over the time that you worked in these companies?
Right. I think just sort of taking a step back for the last 7 odd years is when I've spent time in these companies. For about 5 years before that, I was in management consulting. And so I came after my MBA is when I came into product management, really with very little expectations of what product management actually could be or means on the real world. I
Okay.
think from my standpoint, there are three things that I have seen become very critical over the period that I have been PMing. I think the first one is that behavioral economics has started to
Hmm.
play a huge role in how companies build products out. Most of the large e-commerce companies today are A/B testing work machines to a certain extent. There is data for everything that which is possible. When even back in 2013, when I started, it wasn't this productionized a machine. Right now, it's taken for granted. The positive side of that is a lot of the uh, hard consumer problems, example, trust, for instance, have been solved because people could directly target a small behavioral economics problem,
Hmm.
measure data around it, solve it. So the likes of Airbnb and Uber can exist at scale today if you look at the last 10 years or
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
just because these problems have been tackled. I think the negative of that, obviously, to a large extent, is that uh, there is an incentive to suck you into a black hole of information or clickbait, you will be sucked into that just because the behemoth is too hard to
I
control.
feel like I feel like the product managers hold all the strings basically. We're like the you guys are the puppet masters, and we're like minions, just like dancing to the flow of your orchestrations.
Uh, I mean, I wish I could disagree, but the fact of the matter is, I mean, given that we are talking at the point in time where Twitter and Facebook are in like huge amounts of furor for exactly this topic,
Right.
I think it's a fair assessment. It's not, and this is uh, one of the other changes that I did want to talk about
Mm.
as well. I think so. I don't have a better word for it. Maybe ubiquity is a good word for it, or scale is a big word for it. But if you look back at, say, uh, two factors, right? One, just sort of sort the biggest companies in the world by market cap. You would find the top few are tech companies, tech platforms in that sense.
Mm.
The second one being when these companies report usage numbers, they're talking about billion plus users. So you're talking about the size of a small country's GDP and the
Yeah.
largest population of the countries in the world, right? At this scale, companies who are operating platforms are operating like a small country.
Mm.
And what public policy and choice theory and these fields teach us is that you can't do centralized control.
Mm.
It's just not possible to have a central autocratic dictator telling what the rules of the game should be.
Mm.
And most control, better control, is more federalized in the hands of the users.
Decentralized.
Yeah. And which is partly what, if I was a betting man for the next 10 years, I would say macroeconomics, public policy, these people will form more PM positions
Mm.
and they will shape the agenda quite differently in that
Mm.
sense. So the statement that you made about us being played like puppets, right? I think that should reduce over time because the ambitions of at least the larger companies seem to be now operate a new currency of your own and things on those lines, right?
Right. Right.
They can't sustain with the models that we've been seeing in the last 10 years. At
Right.
least that's my personal take on it.
No, it's a fascinating thread to kind of pick up on, right? Which is the fact that plenty of things like, for example, media or whatever is going to become entirely or has become entirely decentralized, open source. So you're going to probably have a Reddit kind of a verification or upvoting for things to really surface what is real, true, important, insightful, etc. Right? And I think like a lot of this innovation, truth be told, has been product led, right?
Correct.
So that's a fantastic sort of note to ask you about, how much of data do you consume on a daily basis, right? As a product manager, there's just a ton of things that you could ton of signals that you could pick up on, right? So how do you decide what is your 3, 4, 10 things maybe that you really really care about?
So I think I'll break it down in very simple terms, right? So what I try to do is, at one point in time, for the team that I'm trying to measure in, I try to measure the one metric which kind of encompasses everything that the team does, and then break that metric down into subparts as a decision tree. I'll give a very simple example, and this is more important for product teams in general, right? Let's say that team's focus is new user growth, like which is the kind of team that I measure at HelloFresh. And if you were to look at, say, revenue, then you could have split it down into price into quantity, right? That's what you charge. Now, because we are a subscription business, quantity is also the number of times you can get people to buy more HelloFresh boxes over time. And what you're basically trying to do is split out the core number that you have into as many parts as possible. And that decision tree is then very clear to everybody, to saying, this is the number that I'm measuring. This is how this number is affected by all of the sub parts. If the sub part moves up by 5%, my revenue moves up by 5%. And it's a question of both acquisition and retention. And then the idea from an organizational design standpoint is that everybody owning a particular number then owns it completely and can pull all the levers that are in the decision tree. And then this sort of decision tree is mapped onto the org structure as well in a very clear way.
Right.
I hope that high level example made sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, in some sense, you're establishing proxies for the final outcome that you want, right? So in your case, I mean, it's revenue. So the way I look at it, I run a marketing team as well. So the marketers are, even more unscrupulous, I would say, right?
Yeah.
So they are famous for reporting, 75% this and 300% that and whatever. But ultimately, your metrics have to add up to some proxy of revenue, right? So whatever it is that you're reporting, whether it's MQL, SQL, whatever.
Yeah.
So in the 10 minutes that we've spoken itself, I sense that, the role of a product manager has sort of come a long way, right? I mean, in even in the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, right? Typically, I mean, a product person was somehow, was someone who knew a little bit of engineering, right? Who could kind of articulate what that meant to non-engineers and had a sense of business, right? So sort of an overlap of all these three things, right? From that, it's become, extremely data driven, extremely, I feel like at this point of time, it operates more like how FMCG product, owners or marketers are do they call them product marketers or product owners? Something of that sort, right?
They call them product managers, at least
product
my
managers.
friends.
Yeah. So it's sort of coming to that paradigm now, right?
It has evolved in that direction, even though I will add the caveat that product owner roles across multiple organizations vary dramatically.
Yeah.
In my experience, the digital product companies, right? Anybody who is delivering a service digitally, for instance, like a Spotify would be a very good example. There, a product owner is actually the owner of the business in a certain way. That you have to be responsible for the P&L, and you're also responsible for delivering the best customer experience possible. And in some of the companies that I do know, the product owner and the technical interface to the engineering team has also been sort of split out. Like MakeMyTrip is a good example, wherein
Interesting.
They have two roles. One faces more with engineering, one faces more with business and actually drives the business.
So within the product manager function itself, product management function itself, there's a split up?
Correct. And it's multiple teams have multiple types of archetypes that they choose to follow. And I would still argue there's no single definition of saying this is what a product manager is supposed to do. In the companies that at least I have worked for, I can give you a quick overview, right? So in a Myntra, for instance, it's a physical company. There is a huge amount of component of operations and the business teams are slightly separate. So there is an overlap between product people doing some bit of product strategy work, but a lot of it is engineering focused in that sense. In a Book My Show, for instance, there would not be a huge amount of difference between business strategy and product strategy because it's the same thing. It's a digital product at the end of the day, right? So depending on the company, the role can be dramatically different. And I think a skill of a good PM would be to also arrive at the right business strategy for the company. And I haven't sort of seen a particular direction towards saying PO should own more of the business strategy. I think the trend that I have seen is depending on how well a company is structured, product owners actually have way more autonomy to make decisions. HelloFresh is one of those companies wherein I largely own all of the problem statements that affect business in that standpoint. And I work with marketing people to do the execution, whatever that is needed. But it could be, and I'm very aware that it could be a very different setup in some of the smaller companies or in a lot of the Indian companies that I have worked with.
Right. So what do you think about this, phenomenon of product-led growth as such? I mean, is it like some kind of a conspiracy from, by you product folks to get rid of us poor sales and marketing people?
I wouldn't say so, because here is a quantified way of looking at it, right? Let's say you're trying to redo TikTok, for instance, right? How much money would you have to spend to get to those usage levels at this point? You're talking like billions and billions of dollars being spent to reach that scale, right?
But I wonder how you can even model that as well, from a marketing perspective.
Correct. Because I'll take an example from like an actual modeling standpoint for an e-commerce company like Myntra, right? Generally, what is assumed is that the CAC that you should have for acquiring a customer should be largely equivalent to the gross margin that you have on your first transaction. Maybe you can go 20-25% extra because the second transaction or the third transaction of this customer, I will somehow break even. On average, people might make like 1.3, 1.4 transactions. And hence an order of magnitude difference from a gross margin means I will never be able to make money. Right?
That's also because monetization on e-commerce and stuff like that is sort of late stage. Right now we have, let's say 20 years of Amazon, we have, even 10, 15 years of Flipkart and so on. Right. So, yeah.
Correct. And if you take that view, then spending money to acquire customers has a theoretical sort of proof that you cannot cross, right? Yeah. Now, where it starts, because those economics start to break down, if there is not, and your product doesn't have an ability to scale, then there is no way as a company you will ever be profitable. So the way I would address that question is, if product is not growth is not product led, any other alternative leads you to doom. And that's the way at least I would look at it.
Right.
The other slightly less probably less offensive way of putting it, I don't have good words for that, is let's say that your marketing/growth function operates at X efficiency. You want to make it 2X, 3X. An order of magnitude change to that efficiency can happen only if your product is fundamentally performing better.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
You could say that, look, I will introduce some engineers in there, automate some bit of the processes, you will get to 10, 20% better.
Yeah.
But if you believe that I want to get 2x, 3x better, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, fundamentally, I think marketing or growth, right? I mean, is to get people through the front door and then, hope like hell that after that, I mean, the product is good enough or the service or experience is good enough that, that sets off like the domino effect of people wanting to transact more or getting more of their friends and family involved, right? So that's really what every marketer also hopes for, really. So, yeah. So, we spoke briefly about, modeling at scale and so on, right? So I want to talk about that now. Again, I mean, you've seen scale at significant levels with, Myntra, BookMyShow, all of these guys, right? What changes at scale? How do you balance, your short-term trade-offs and your long-term trade-offs and stuff like that? How do you, like, for example, how do you balance growth and user delight, for example, right? So can you walk us through, some of these choices that you have to make at scale?
Right. I think at scale, there are at least two factors that become very, very critical, right? One is a change that you're trying to make to your growth product. What percentage of your potential consumers will it try to hit starts becoming a very critical question, right? So if I am introducing a feature which will be relevant only to 10% of my user base, how does it actually get modeled back into my equation to saying, is it worth it to do for only 10%? Or should I take a smaller uplift, which is for, say, 90% of the consumers and more relevant, right? And that feeds back into the second part, which is a harder prioritization question. Like, for every single initiative that you're picking up, you then have to start to do this initiative, and prioritization starts to become harder as you sort of scale out, right? Because just to give an example, right? I joined Freecharge when it was still like a 2 BHK apartment. It wasn't like, it didn't really have an office as such. And we witnessed huge amounts of growth. There were things that we could do at that scale by just hollering at each other across a room, which are just not possible at probably the scale at which HelloFresh is in teams operating in 13 countries, engineering teams split in at least 2 different locations in New York and Berlin. And the thing that starts to matter more is not being able to quickly hustle a side project which will impact only, say, 5%, 10% consumers. And I do believe, at least in larger organizations, pulling together projects also becomes harder because overall execution is much faster in smaller teams, and maintaining that agility in larger teams also is a little bit harder. So the mantra that at least I use at scale is prioritize anything which has a larger impact across the highest consumer base, even if it is a smaller percentage impact. I will rely on compounding at some point in time for that to be materially useful at the end of an year, because compounding for a larger growth base would be much better and much better for overall outcomes, at least in that sense.
Right.
Does that make sense? Because
no, that's interesting. So one of the other things I want to talk to you is about this whole trend of build for Bharat, that seems to have taken root, right? Probably because of the India stack and, few things related to that as well. There's also this thing of, build for the world, where, companies can build a SaaS product, ship it, and then, launch it. The likes of Chargebee and, Freshworks and so on have done that eminently well, right?
Correct.
So what do you think? I mean, so few of the, I mean, like a lot of the products that you have operated with are,
Mhm.
built for Bharat type of products, right? Book My Show, for example, right? Acutely
Mhm.
Indian
Mhm.
problem to solve. Um,
Correct.
what does it take to build for Bharat, and what does it take to build for the world?
Uh, so I would like to go a little deeper there. At, why would you presume that building for Bharat would be very, very different? So let's list out the most popular products that at least I know for Bharat, right? There is a PUBG, there is a WhatsApp, there is a TikTok,
Hmm.
right? I don't see these guys doing something very dramatically different for Bharat. Do
Interesting.
they?
Hmm.
In the sense that in some cases, at least I do know that TikTok has a language option that you can switch all the menus there.
Hmm.
But most of the product is built in a sense that even if you did not know a particular language, iconography would let you through,
Hmm.
right? The same is true for, say, age demographics as well, right? So my parents use WhatsApp as easily as I do.
Hmm.
And I would argue that at least for a consumer product and an engagement product standpoint, there is no real difference between what a Bharat audience expects and a urban Indian audience expects, because the fundamental need states for a consumer are very, very similar. The trend diverges a little bit for transactional products, and that is partly the reason why I believe nobody has been able to crack uh, that tier 2 tier 3 market from a transactional commerce standpoint in a really big way. People have made very good inroads, but my assertion is that we don't understand a Bharat consumer in a very, very deep way. I'll give you an example of a user research that we did in Book My Show to actually help put it in perspective, right?
Hmm.
So in a tier 2 3 market, there is a huge amount of power gap between who avails a service versus who has a payment instrument, for instance, right? So if you want to go watch a movie ticket, you have to ask money from your parents who have a credit card.
Hmm.
You have to ask money from your siblings who have a car, who have an ability to pay.
Hmm.
Now here, solving for that particular use case would involve you make all of the decisions and let somebody else do the payment for you, or you introduce credit as an option, or the solutions could be very different. But I think at the core of it, you identified a problem that this user segment had, and then you went about chasing it. Now, a question to ask is, at least from an Indian e-commerce standpoint, what I figured out it working at the companies that you were mentioning, right, is that an urban Indian consumer is always way more profitable. And chasing down a tier 2, 3 customer in a disaggregated way was either economically not super viable or like a 2 year, 3 year long project wherein the payments infra would also improve and you would then be able to tackle a bunch of these problems. I do see a lot of people making inroads into solving for Bharat, but not in a way where I would say it's really cracking the heart of a problem. For the solving for the world, I think we've made way more progress in that. At least the B2B companies there, right? The likes of WebEngage, uh, Zoho is one good example. Freshworks
So,
is another.
yeah.
Now, these are people who fundamentally said, look, I will take money from whoever is willing to give it. I will build a product for the largest possible audience. And if you just sort of backtrack that framework, right, you identified a user segment who had a problem, you attacked that problem and you solved it really, really well. There was some pot of gold to be had at the end of it.
Hmm.
I don't think uh, a lot of the e-commerce companies in India have found that pot of gold, and hence Bharat is largely unsolved, at least in my eyes. It
Hmm.
and it's a very subjective assessment, but that's at least my
I
take
mean,
on the problem.
I think that's sort of fair, right? Because I think if you look at like much of the e-commerce modeling in the early days, I'm talking about 2008, 2009, or whatever. A lot of it would show that, hey, you would have that classic thing of like, internet penetration and stuff like that, saying that this is the untapped market that we have and whatever. But I think in 10 years, people realize that the same set of like, 70 million or 80 million users will transact more than once on the platform, essentially,
Correct.
right? No matter what reach you go to. So net, I mean, obviously there'll be an incremental addition, but net. So,
Yeah. And
sorry, go ahead.
at least from a commerce standpoint, that story hasn't really panned out, at least
exactly.
in a big way. And I'm still waiting for some signs to point in a direction to saying, look, the actual transacting consumer base in India is expanding, and they're not buying at the neighborhood kirana store and actually buying from an online platform.
Right.
But to be fair, I don't think we've even cracked enough of the problems to incentivize that switch.
Sure, I'm largely optimistic on that front, but yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you though. I kind of agree.
Yeah. See, I'm also very optimistic on that front, and I'll give you one data point that made me very, very optimistic from at least a Myntra standpoint. The average order value of a person placing an order in a tier 3 market was higher than an average order value in a tier 1 city. Now, the reason for that was very simple. You don't have branded stores opening a shop in a very small town in India. Right, so there is no Under Armour in Patna, for instance. Right, Patna is not a small city by any stretch of imagination.
My wife will
right now, if you have to go buy an actual Under Armour genuine shoe, you have to go via an online medium. And when you're solving a real problem of accessibility of that form, there is some amount of money to be made. I just feel like we haven't cracked the entire premise completely yet. It can't just be, you don't have this accessible to you and hence I will try to sell it to you. So you're still talking the creamiest layer amongst a very, very small city, right? What would be relevant to a guy who is a medium level income in a tier 3 town?
That's a very interesting point. Yeah. And, I was reading a recent consumer study as well saying that, consumption is back and stuff like that. And interestingly, it was being led by the tier 2, tier 3 cities and villages. In fact, at this point of time. So, yeah, I mean, there's plenty to unpack on that front, I feel, right? Really get to the nitty-gritties of that. So another thing I want to talk about is, look at the enterprise, for example, right? Look at B2B enterprise, for example, the applications and so on. Anytime people bitch and moan about email or Slack or whatever it is, I remind them that, 12 years back, I used CRMs of those age or those, that era basically, which were, I don't know what to talk about it, right? So these were just like ready databases with lipstick on it, right?
Yeah.
So, now you're looking at, this whole trend of like the consumerization of the enterprise as such. So, do you believe at some point of time these things will overlap? B2B, B2C, because Slack has shown itself, to, sort of be a pioneer on that, right? If you look at plenty of other applications as well, forget about the fact that they're very beautiful or whatever, but they actually focus on end users, not just the people paying for it, right?
Correct. So I have a two-part opinion on that, and I completely just sharing a personal anecdote on the example that you gave. So I joined McKinsey back in 2007, right? So the email client of choice was Lotus Notes for some weird reason. Lotus Notes used to ship with another application. Yeah. The Lotus Notes used to ship with another application called Kill Notes.exe. So the only job of that was you double click on this and it will kill all Lotus Notes processes for you. And I had to use this 5 times a day.
Wow.
And clearly we have moved much, we moved much farther ahead than that. I think enterprise in general, right? The two trends that I was talking about. One is the expectations from an average consumer for design and user experience have increased dramatically. Also because this has been in parallel with the rise of the smartphones, right? So
Correct.
if you are delivering a particular service, you have to have a software equivalent. And what that's a mobile app equivalent, what that's meant is at least either the existing providers or new people coming onto the space, it is a necessary requirement for people to follow. And IT managers making these decisions cannot make it in isolation for saying if the consumers are not happy, then it doesn't sort of make sense. The second thing that at least I'm starting to see is a lot of the business model for these kind of tools has moved to SaaS in or a monthly or an yearly payment rather than like a lump sum which an IT manager used to probably negotiate to. I think negotiation part aside, it's still a subscription that you're signing up for, and that has meant that a lot of small companies solving for a very small niche. At least in my team, I counted over the last quarter or so, we had just in my team taken up about 45 odd subscriptions.
Wow.
And these were very small tools solving a very small
No,
problem.
and I know this is not the exception as well, because I know personally as well. I mean, if we look at engineering teams or product teams, I'm sure we'll be using 30 plus applications.
Right. Now, what that means is that even for a very small budget outlay, my team alone can take a subscription tool, which they use for their purpose. If anybody else wants to extend it, they can. It's a agreement we keep negotiating. So the selling process has changed a little. You need to convince me as a head of a particular team that we need to take a tool, try it out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We will junk the subscription at the end of 2 quarters. That is a very different selling process than selling it to an IT head in, say, Microsoft.
Right.
And that probably did inhibit a lot of the sales. With a higher expectation from tools and an ability for me to buy tools piecemeal, I do believe that the benchmark that a lot of the SaaS companies are held against are also very different, right? So the expectations of a designer using Figma just for my team are very different than what an IT person was expecting a tool like Figma to do.
Yeah.
And because of the change in dynamics, I think the opportunity for smaller companies to solve for a very small niche are also much higher.
Yeah. I mean, that's fantastic. Yeah, because I think that decision making is completely decentralized, as you're saying. So you can find silos in every large enterprise as well, and maybe solve a particular problem really well, and hope to, if not acquire the entire company as users, maybe at least the team, right? So
correct.
Yeah.
So at least at a trial stage, it's much easier because the outlay that you need to have for doing something like that is not very huge.
Yeah.
And because it's also not a multi-year contract that you're signing into, the amount of budget I have to allocate for all of those 45 tools put together was not in tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. And you can switch on, switch off as well.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. So Ravdeep, let's do a rapid fire round just to quicken the pace a little bit. Right?
Oh,
damn. So
Sure.
I promise this is not going to be anything scandalous, nothing you can't say on camera or whatever. So let's start with product question to you. Most delightful feature you've consumed?
Most delightful feature I've consumed. I think it was the first time I used Uber actually. The change of me being able to press a switch of a button and
a cab show.
I think a C-class showed up. So this was when Uber launched in India.
Right.
And we just happened to go to a NASCAR product conclave at that point in time. I think this is 4 years back. I was completely hooked on this is the shiz, man. Like seriously? Within 5 minutes of having pressed a button, Mercedes C-Class and ends up at your door. It was probably the most mind-blowing experiences.
No, seriously, right? I mean, some of these things, I mean, we take for granted at this point of time. And but if you just really look at things in detail. I mean, it's phenomenal. Whether food showing up at your doorstep or I don't know. I mean, you could
Yeah.
order anything these days, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the most. Sorry, go ahead. You were saying something?
And I also remembered like one of the very, very small examples. I think Swiggy did a redesign 2 years, 3 years back
Mm,
when they started showing those discounts as that small wheel which turns
mm.
at a very slow pace. And as you keep scrolling faster, that wheel also moves faster. I thought, like, as a very small example, that was amazing user delight. And
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and Swiggy in India has done some fantastic things, especially
yeah,
now, right? Post COVID.
mm,
I mean, body temperature of people and so on and so forth, saying that, this person was checked about 30 minutes back, his body temperature was found to be this, and doing that at scale, right? I mean, again, it's just phenomenal execution, I feel.
yeah, yeah.
So, okay, most interesting thing that any user research has thrown up, something that completely blew you away.
Uh, I think it was one of the Book My Show user researches as itself. I can give you 2 or 3 examples. So we did a survey wherein people from our company went to tier 2, 3 cities, did interviews with people, tried to identify patterns and trends of how people use their smartphones. How does Book My Show integrate into their lives? I think one of the biggest things I realized, which I had never imagined. So there are apps in the Android store which let you exist in 2 or 3 different profiles in your system. So
Okay.
you would have 2 instances of WhatsApp, for instance, and you would use one for family and friends, and you would use one for your girlfriend or your
Wow.
significant other, maybe, right?
Interesting.
And there were these recurring patterns with a bunch of these tools, like tools that you use to. So I remember as a kid, right? We used to rent those uh, CDs, or as in, what can I say, movies that you rent out for like a very sort of small sum.
Mm,
Most of that has gone digital in tier 3 markets in India. So
mm,
what you do is you pay somebody 5 rupees or 10 rupees. They would transfer that file over Bluetooth. I forget the name of that app
mm.
which is used to do that, but you basically pay that person money. This file will be transferred over a Wi-Fi network, that private Wi-Fi network that will be created between these two apps.
Wow.
And it was a very different usage pattern that I had not seen earlier. I
Correct.
completely forget the name of that app. I think Share app or something. I'll just probably search for that.
Yeah.
But
So a lot of these recharge shop guys and stuff like that, I mean, they either help people download songs or like, download movies, transfer movies and so on and so forth. I've seen that behavior as well. Yeah.
correct. So that was like all the recharge shops monetize using something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just the tech behind it and how that thing worked was phenomenal for me. I mean, at least 2, 3 years back, I had no idea that this world existed outside my sort of cocooned existence. And
Right.
that's partly the reason why I was in the Bharat answer. I was being very skeptical to saying, I don't think we as PMs understand the market enough to saying that we are going to crack it. It's the people that I used to interact with had no idea that this world existed outside our
Right.
cocoons in that sense.
No, I mean, I'm sure, I mean, people have this, whatever kind of movements a lot of times, right? I mean, between what you expect and what the users are actually doing.
Correct.
So, okay, tough questions coming up now. So, if you were head of product at Netflix, what is one thing you would change?
Uh, I think they're
I'm sure
spending a
you've thought
shit.
about this.
Yeah, they're spending a shit ton of money doing that already. But
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of the content is content discovery is actually quite broken in Netflix. So they do claim to do a lot of personalization.
Mm,
But for the width of catalog that they have, if I open up the app on a daily basis, which I have done since Corona,
mm,
the new content that I'm recommended is very, very poor.
mm.
So
What do you think?
content discover. Sorry, please say that
What do
again.
you think can improve?
the content discovery overall, right? So using signals from what I'm trying to watch to inject newer content that their catalog might have. I think what they're trying to do is to very sharply focus on what my interest areas are without ever understanding in very huge depth on what I might want to watch in the future as well, right? So I think specifically, to just give an example, right, I would not mind watching a lot of indie film content because they have never recommended it. They don't even know that it's a hole that I can go down deeper in. And because I also don't spend a lot of time trying to clearly articulate or search for specific type of content on Netflix, they never get to know. And hence my usage is continuously down on the platform because every time I open, they keep showing the same stuff. I don't make the investment that I would have, and then I back off.
Maybe, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting problem to solve, right? Maybe, I mean, based on usage or whatever, they could probably poll you at strategic points to say, hey, I mean, would you be interested in something like this, right?
Correct. And the way they do discovery today, right, there's just a section for new releases, there's a section for continue from where you left off, and then pretty much exactly things that you have seen in the past, they would try to create widgets around. This is a theme that you might like, this is a theme that you might like. Now ideally they could have a lot more themes there, and the product solutions to the problem could be very many, but introduce themes that I probably just see a trailer of more frequently, or try to poll me, as you were saying, as an extended onboarding for somebody who's seen like 100 videos. Maybe try to inject more stuff around it. And I see Spotify doing that quite a lot.
Phenomenally well. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, the amount of, so there's a couple of things, right? I mean, when I look at YouTube and Spotify, Spotify does that better than Netflix, but YouTube hands down does that better than Spotify. Just the new content discovery as such, right? I mean, you can just go down a rabbit hole on in YouTube, actually, really.
Correct. So, and YouTube has sort of dedicated sections for saying trending content. There are things that are relevant for your geography. I will sort of surface that up. Netflix does it, but it's toned down. So if YouTube does it at an 8 or a 9, and Spotify does it at probably a 7 or a 8, Netflix is at 2 or 3.
No, there's a huge difference. Yeah.
And the thing is, at least from my standpoint, this is a critical recipe for success. It's an area that Netflix cannot mess up in.
$1 billion problem to solve for sure. Right?
Correct. Okay. Specifically when you're spending billions of dollars trying to beef up that your own productions.
Yeah.
It arguably you should be focusing on this as highly as well.
Yeah. What's that? I think 7,000 movies or something of that sort they're going to ship a year. So it's insane.
Yeah, I think their $16 billion or something was their budget for productions this year.
Good God.
Yeah.
Okay, next big question. If you were head of product at Uber, what would you change?
Head of product at Uber. I think the biggest change will be multimodal transport. So the thing that I mean, till at least I was in India, I used to use Uber all the time. I do know how to drive, but I could not drive in Bangalore traffic. It's just not possible. And Bangalore
level of expertise.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I'm a little bit too laid back, and the kind of stress that driving causes,
totally
I just can't take it. So in cities where there is a little better public transport infrastructure, the ideal scenario is that you book an Uber from your home to the nearest train station or bus station or whatever. Take the bus. At the end of the bus, then you're able to take another Uber or a Lime scooter or whatever that is.
Kind of like how Google suggests, right? Basically, like if you look at maps, that's how it suggests. But I don't see Uber or any one of them jump to do it because again, it's at a loss of revenue, right, for them.
Correct. And the challenge with them is that it's a huge monetary disincentive in the short term.
Yeah.
I do believe that in the long term, it would work out though.
Yeah.
A lot more people would start picking it up just to go to a shortest distance in the fastest possible way.
No,
And cities can't really scale up long term, right? It's a topic that I've thought a lot about. I think city infrastructure is going to be the biggest laggard. And if a city like Bangalore has to be really reformed and has a fledgling bus service from point A to point B, more feeder points into that point A and point B will actually help manage the traffic situation in a really, really big way than it would otherwise. So that is one of the things that I would argue. I think the other one, at least for Uber, would be better programs for the drivers, because I did believe that while I was taking a lot of these cabs myself, the gamification from a driver standpoint felt to the point exploitative. At least they felt like they had to do X number of rides every week to get the incentive that they were getting. And sometimes they were being pushed above a particular limit.
Yeah, beyond safety. Yeah. No, I know of a case where a friend of mine was traveling to the airport and, the driver slept off at the wheel, right? And literally swerved off the road. So it was, thankfully nothing happened, but then, I completely get that. They're all pretty overworked, I think. Okay. Yeah. Final head of product question to you. Head of product at WhatsApp, what would you change?
The biggest thing that I would change would be the merchant solution. I think they're sitting on that gold mine.
Exactly.
They have been talking about solving it for ages. They just have not solved it, right? So there is no reason why I don't want to pay my milkman via WhatsApp. He's on that platform. I know it. And
even I was thinking from a business perspective as well, right? So, I went to the salon recently. I took that risk, right? I was just talking to the guy and I was like, look, there are a whole bunch of people looking all sorts of, whatever Neanderthal in my, apartment right now. Nobody has had a haircut in about 3-4 months, right? Why don't you just WhatsApp all these guys a video of how you're wearing a mask and sanitizing everything and then doing that stuff just as a, carrot to dangle in front of these guys. It could be his CRM, right? Basically.
Yeah. So, and that's a trick that they've missed out on. So from the smallest of merchants, the milkman example that I was giving to very established chains trying to do their work. All of that market is underserved today.
Because every other experience, whether it's Google Pay or Paytm or whatever, feels broken at some point, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that.
At least in an Indian setup, that's the problem to solve. And I would argue even at a global level, man, if there's no, outside of China, where there is like an Alipay and a WeChat, all of that infrastructure, the conversational part I've seen, I've only sort of seen being tracked in my travels. For instance, I was in Thailand once and the Grab driver sort of interacted with me and tried to deliver food at the right place at the right time. And because we didn't know each other's language and we could still talk and give instructions in that sense. But that market overall is uncracked across the world. So I would argue it's a very, very big opportunity for us.
Huge opportunity, I feel, especially given the penetration that they have.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to some fun questions. What is the best quarantine hack that you've discovered?
I think the best one I've discovered about myself, that I'm a creature of habit. That, just having very small rituals like waking up in the morning, making breakfast is me prepping up for beginning to work. And at the end of work, I will go out for a run. It took me 4 weeks to realize that this is what I was missing in my life, that there is no beginning ritual of work and end ritual of work.
Yeah.
And that meant that work continues throughout the day.
Yeah.
Once I realized that these small things do matter, and now I go out for a run every evening, I'm much happier. Things are much more settled.
You're product managing yourself now.
Yeah, in a big way. And I'm like very ashamed to admit it took 4 weeks for that realization to dawn.
No, I mean,
But
I don't think so. I'm not a big fan of, at least I wasn't a big fan of work from home. I'm not sure if you were.
yeah,
I wasn't at all. And initially, the same thing happened, right? I mean, there's no compartmentalizing office and, home and stuff. So work
yeah,
kept bleeding across, right? So some of the
correct.
days you just wake up to a call and then sleep with the, earphones in your ear,
Yeah,
and it's just one whole bleed. And to me, in the morning, it was washing utensils. So I would wake up and
yeah.
wash utensils, and my mind would be like, "Oh yeah, correct, start of the
Yeah.
day." So
Yeah, so I realized this one of the days, right? I joined a call very early in the morning, about 8 a.m., with like everything on mute and me having like a brush in my mouth. That's the day I realized, no, I have to do something. So,
right.
and I mean, then I invented these small rituals, and now I actually enjoy work from home.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, office is open. I could go back if I wanted to, but
Uh-huh.
I don't think I do need to, and I will for the next few months for
Yeah.
sure.
Likewise, I kind of have resigned myself to working out of home for the rest of the year. So I don't
Yeah,
think it's going to happen anytime soon.
same here,
Okay.
same here.
What books are you reading at this point of time? What books would you recommend?
Uh, I'm reading a couple, so I'm back to.
Oh, you're one of
So
those. You read two books in parallel.
yes, one fiction, one non-fiction. Generally, that's what I do. So the
Okay.
non-fiction one I'm reading is called "In Service of the Republic."
Hmm.
Uh, I will just. I think Vijay Kelkar and Ajay Shah and Vijay Kelkar.
Sounds interesting.
So, like I was mentioning, I do like reading about economic policy quite a lot. These guys
Uh-huh.
have done a fantastic job on that front. I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to understand incentives and public policy in general.
Hmm.
And the second one that I'm reading is more around, it's more a fiction book, which
Hmm.
is like complete out and out pot boiler, Robert Galbraith, the Silkworm, the J.K. Rowling.
Okay.
She's
Yeah.
now writing like a
Under the pen name.
detective series.
Right.
So I listen to podcasts quite a lot. So
Yeah, that was my
yeah,
next
so
question, actually.
Storytel is the platform. Yeah. So
My next
basically,
question
Silkworm
was,
is what
what podcasts would you listen to?
the one I listen to most frequently is Amit Verma's series. So it's mostly around public policy, history, some intersection of that. And it's a fairly long podcast. I think every week it's about a 2 hour, 3 hour
Wow.
podcast. It's
Yeah.
called Seen and the Unseen is the name of that podcast. And the book recommendation is also from the podcast itself. So
Podcast.
these two gentlemen came on the platform and have written a book. So that's the one that I was reading.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
the fiction book that I was mentioning, The Silkworm, is also like an audio book that I listen to when I'm running.
Okay. Okay.
So
Very interesting. Hey, this has been a fascinating episode. I mean, this
needs
conversation
to-
could, go on for another couple of hours, I'm sure, but I want to be mindful of your time. So, since we're nearing the end of this, right? So, hello, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, there was just some interruption in the middle, but I couldn't hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So my final question to you is that, you have a bunch of startup folks listening to this podcast at, in difficult circumstances, I would say.
Mhm.
So any words of advice to people who are listening on, what they could do?
I think the only thing that I would mention is that I was around when the 2008 downturn was happening. It was my first job, pretty much, that I had
Yes.
signed up for. Uh, in the long term, things are generally sorted out, and a depression of this sorts creates more opportunities than otherwise, right? So
Right.
some of the most profitable companies that I have seen, or companies with very, very high market caps that I have seen, were generated in that 2008 to 10 period, where sort of money was looking for the right opportunities, and it landed on anybody's doorsteps who was sort of showing a way out of this crisis, right? Because there is a certain kind of investor who is right now investing in gold, right? Anyways, that's not the kind of person who's going to give you money.
Yeah.
There is some way a VC also has to justify saying, I will make a 15%, 20% on my overall portfolio.
Right.
They can only do it for breakthrough companies.
And they have to
And-
allocate their capital, right?
Correct. So anything that you can do to cut down burn in the short term, figure out a way to survive the storm, and be true to the mission that you started off your firm with or your product with. I think you will end up at the right place. There's just some conviction you would have to sustain this particular storm. It is going to be hard because the recession predictions are also about twice as worse as they were in 2008.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's a balance that you would have to strike, but mostly things in the long term do turn out well.
Right. That's a fantastic note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much for your time, Ravdeep. This has been a fascinating conversation. A lot of insights for people to kind of absorb, reflect, and think about. So thanks again. Thanks so much for making the time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roshan. Glad I could be helpful.
Thank you. Good day.
See ya. Bye.